So we're going to go ahead and get started. So tonight's program is coping with unknowns, and we're going to talk a little bit about the unknowns. And before we get started, we're going to say happy holidays, happy winter solstice. And I am so glad that we've got a good group of people on the call this evening. So I always like to thank our sponsors. Novartis is sponsoring tonight's program. Without them, we would not be able to have the MS Mental Wellness Chat this evening. But then also a really important thank you to MS Visa News. Without their leadership on this program, a couple years ago, they're really the brainchild of how this program exists. And so I want to say thank you to them as well. So thank you to Novartis and to MS Visa News for bringing this program, much needed program, to the MS community. And so before we get started, I'm going to just introduce myself in case you don't know me. My name is Jessica Thomas. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I work as the director of patient education for a rare disease. And I have a lot of experience in MS and progressive disease. And on top of that, I live with MS. So I have a lot of varied experience, and I am thankful to be here. I've been a therapist in the past, and now I'm working, I do patient education programs. So we are going to talk about a couple things this evening. And we're going to frame it around coping with the unknown. And we're also going to talk a little bit about looking forward, because I feel like if a lot of coping with the unknown is because we can't look forward, but we're also in December. And I think December is a pretty special month for a lot of different reasons for us. But in general, I think December is always a good reflective month. And so I think it's good for us to think about things to look forward to as well as we go into the new year, not necessarily resolutions, but I wanted to spend some time on that. We have also Kanita from California. She is not new. It's good to see you again, Kanita. And Lisa, she tries to not miss webinars. She's in California alone. Lisa, I am so glad that you're here, and this is a very resilient place to be. And so I am glad that you're a part of the conversation tonight. So thank you so much for everyone for being here. We have Sarah from Washington State. It's her first time. Sarah, I am so glad that you are trying this out. And I think that my guess is that you'll love this community. It is a really special one. It's unique in the format, but again, I think it's a great program, and you'll see that your peers are incredibly great at sharing resources and information. So we're going to, the first thing we're going to talk about, we're going to leave it on this slide for a couple minutes, but living with uncertainty is hard. Right? And so at any point when I'm talking, if you guys want to chime in, you can. I will ask questions and ask you guys to respond if you're willing. But please know that you actually have space to kind of chime in if I say something that really stands out to you and you have something you want to share. But, so living with uncertainty, and we've done this with COVID for actually a really long time now. But prior to that, if you were living with MS, you kind of were dealing with that too. And maybe other situations as well have given that feeling of not having certainty. And, it's hard because we crave, as humans, we crave to kind of have information, to crave to know what's going on, and to have things be relatively predictable. And, one thing that we know from research is that, research shows us that we'll use like a job, for example. If you were at risk for possibly losing your job, the idea of being at risk for possibly losing your job takes over way much more stress than actually losing your job. It's a really weird, interesting thing. So it's that fear, that uncertainty piece that actually carries a lot of weight. And so today we're going to talk about some strategies to kind of help us cope. And with MS, there are some things that are uncertain. And I'm going to have you guys tell me like some of the things that that you might feel that you're that kind of bother you a little bit about MS, kind of not knowing? Like for me, I've gotten much better. I've had MS since I've been 26 and I'm in my 40s now. But when I was first diagnosed, I had a lot of trouble dealing with the uncertainty of what was it going to look like when it got closer to 20 years out. And now I'm closer to that 20 years and I kind of know what that looks like. But back then, that was really hard to know. And sometimes for people, the uncertainty with MS in terms of like, will I have another relapse? That's something that I think is something that can often impact people to a great level. Or the uncertainty of not knowing if you're going to feel that great. You know, today you might feel really good, and tomorrow you might not feel as great. Your energy might be impacted. And so it is, MS has and carries some levels of uncertainty, but there's also some predictability with MS too. And we have some proactive things that we can do as well. But today we're going to focus on, you know, when we have a health condition or have things in our life that are uncertain. Even I think sometimes applying for the disability process has a lot of uncertainty to it. And that can create a lot of frustration and difficult feelings and stress. We have Lisa who says, I've heard that stress is toxic for MS. And you're so right. Stress is really bad for MS. Stress is bad for our bodies and it's bad for our immune systems. And it's when you have prolonged periods of stress, it can create a lot of havoc. And one thing I know as a therapist, and I've worked with MS and have specialized in neurological disease for a long time, is that I know that stress and MS do not go hand in hand. They are not good friends. And a lot of this mental wellness chat is actually about talking about stress management and tools, so that way we can learn how to cope with the stress, because stress is going to be everywhere, right? And things are going to sometimes be uncertain too. So we're going to start with this slide right here. One of the tools for dealing with uncertainty is to not resist it, to accept how you're feeling and to acknowledge how you're feeling about it. I want to ask, is there anybody that's newly diagnosed on today's call? If you're newly diagnosed, go to the question box and just say newly diagnosed. I won't say your name if you don't want me to, but I'm going to share kind of an example, and then I think that will resonate. For those of you that are not newly diagnosed, you'll probably really understand this. When I was first diagnosed with MS, it was, I was a lot younger. It was a good long time ago, it feels like. But it seemed like if this was my MS, my hand, it seemed like that is all that I could see. And I could not see or experience really that much beyond the MS. And over time, my MS is always still here, and it's a part of my life, and I have symptoms I deal with. It's over here, but it's not in front of my face. So I can kind of deal with a little bit of the uncertainty, a little bit of the future, et cetera. But when it was right in front of my face when I was first diagnosed, it was really, really challenging to be able to cope with. So there's in therapy and in counseling, there's something that is really important to do, and it's to be able to accept how you're feeling and acknowledge it and not judge yourself for how you're feeling. And so if you're in a period of uncertainty and it makes you feel stressed, or if it makes you feel scared, it's okay to acknowledge, you know what, I feel kind of scared. Or if you're making a treatment change and you're feeling overwhelmed, tell yourself, or tell a friend, I'm feeling overwhelmed. It's important to kind of acknowledge those feelings instead of trying to push them away. Because when we try to push away our feelings or push away our thoughts, etc., then what happens is they come back. And sometimes they come back and they're strong, and they can cause us a lot more distress. But if we allow ourselves to feel how we're feeling, then it allows us to walk through and move through some of those feelings a little bit easier. So I just wanted to mention that it's important to accept our feelings. We don't have to like them. We don't have to love them. But sometimes we have to let them be around for a little bit, and we can move through them so much easier when we give them space. The next thing we're going to talk about is, we'll move to our next slide. is investing in our self-care. So in times of uncertainty, one thing that's important to do is invest in taking care of ourselves. During COVID, we covered this a lot in the mental wellness chat. And I think it's actually a good thing to always continue covering because investing in our self care is really investing in our stress management, it's really investing in our emotional wellness. And ultimately, it's investing in our MS to some degree too. So because as Lisa said, stress is toxic for MS. It's bad for MS, and so it's important. The self care component stays, a priority and high. And one of the best resources you have is yourself. And when that resource is really depleted, then you can end up being depleted as well. And if you're depleted, we already know MS is depleting sometimes in itself in a disease. And so if you're feeling depleted, then you're not going to be able to do the things that you need to do. So I'm going to go to the question box and I'm going to ask you guys just a question real quick. Make sure people can still type. What is something that you do to invest in yourself? And I will get us started. So, and how do you invest in your self-care? So one of the things that I do is sleeping. I make sure that I have a pretty good evening routine and I go to bed at a pretty good hour. And that helps me to be more resilient. And that's one of the ways I invest in my self-care because I could stay up, I could watch TV, I could do a lot of different things, but definitely it is important. Okay, good. We've got some. So in terms of comments. Let me go to the comments first because maybe I missed some of them first. So Maddie's been having some heavy leg days lately. So it sounds like that's been a challenge and probably definitely creates some uncertainties because when your legs are not working well, or if you have any symptoms that occur, like sometimes I might have cognitive symptoms that come up, and if I have them a couple days in a row, then that creates some stress and some feelings of uncertainty. We have Lisa, who's had MS for 20 years since January. Anne Marie, I'm glad that you brought this up. Since my last MRI, I've been feeling anxious because I don't know what may come in the future. And that's a very common aspect of MS, in the cancer world, and I work some in the cancer world now, but they call it scanxiety. And it's where you have anxiety related to what your scan is going to tell you. And I think that's very true for MS, is that sometimes with MS, we might feel like we're doing great, but once we need to get that MRI done, and we need to talk with our doctor and make sure everything is going well, because we can look fine and our MRI might not look that great. And so it's very common to have a little bit of anxiety related to a scan that you have coming up, or what will it look like. And we're going to talk about some strategies on how to kind of calm that a little bit, because if we're worried about what our next MRI is going to look like, then we're missing all that time in between, right? And it might be time that we're actually feeling kind of good. And so that's important. We have Lori, who for self-care does physical therapy, exercises, healthy eating and sleeping. Dion limits exposure to stressful situations and interactions. I would give you guys both high fives if I could. Anne Marie says, I either spend time playing on the computer or cleaning. Since getting over COVID, I've been sleeping and taking a lot of naps, but feeling good in recovery. Thank goodness. I'm so glad that you're feeling good in your recovery. And Maddie, he sells art and is using his money to buy a ukulele, which Maddie is very musical, so that's something that is perfect for his self-care. And then Kanita says to eat right. Terry said to have a part-time job to keep my mind off my disabilities. 32 years with MS. That is a great thing, to have something else to do. And we talk about in the MS mental wellness chat about having purpose, because purpose is incredibly important. And it can be a job, it can be volunteering, it could be music, it could be, but we need other things. Linda says that she showers and gets dressed every day, whether I leave the house or not. That is a great self-care technique. Janine likes to meditate every day. Anne Marie said, if my sugar drops, I have trouble keeping your balance, so probably maintaining your blood sugar levels, it sounds like. And then Lisa said, listen to old cassette tapes I made and sing and dance to my favorite songs. A plus to living alone. I sang with Mariah Carey last night on a Christmas concert, so I understand. A plus of not living alone is my husband was punished by listening to that. We have Carol, who exercises, aquafit, healthy eating, and rest. Dion takes breaks when she's feeling fatigued or in pain. Carol said MRI in January to see what COVID did to her MS. And Lisa said, I bought an above ground pool for the summer. That's a great plan. And then Anne Marie said, I help care for my cats and tarantulas. If you were in person, everybody would want to know more about that. Okay, so we're going to move on to our next slide real quick. But you guys do some really great things, and you're investing in your self-care. And so that is really important. So we're going to skip across that. I didn't realize I was already ahead of myself with the chat box question. So the next thing we're going to talk about is finding healthy coping and comfort items. So what we're going to say for this, so you guys already have some really good coping items in terms of self-care. But we're going to frame this around a little bit about what are some things, we all probably have like an unhealthy thing that we might deviate to if we're feeling stressed. Like I might eat chocolate, or I might stay up a little bit too late looking at my phone or something like that. But when we're in a state of uncertainty or something is, weighing on our minds, either related to our MS or the world, the state of things, what are some healthy coping and comfort items that we can go to? What are some things that provide you a sense of calm and comfort? And I want everyone in the question box to participate and share, because here's the deal, is that as we share, someone else is listening to it, and there is a really good chance that you might be inspiring someone as well, or reminding them about something that they could do. So I will start us off. Anne Marie, when she said she helped to care for her cats and tarantulas, I am tarantula free in my house, but I have 2 cats and a dog. And so those are really, really helpful for me to spend time with my animals. And they are a very nice coping and a comfort item actually for me. So we have Lori, who says singing and writing are 2 coping mechanisms. Dion said reading a book is a good escape. Carol said going to Starbucks with her daughter or reading in bed. Those are great. Maddie said good food and water and coffee. Absolutely. Antoinette says I love to participate in painting via MS art therapy. We talked about art therapy a while ago in one of the MS chats, and that was a really cool thing to talk about. Anne Marie said I help to care for my mom's health. So reading and making up my own songs for a good laugh. These are great things. Cindy said music and dancing. Perfect. So you kind of see, and then Linda said she's in a singing class. I'm going to get a drink real quick. I'm sorry, I'm so thirsty. See if it gave more people time. Okay, it did. Pamela said she agrees with Linda, getting dressed with makeup and nowhere to go, but kind of getting up and getting ready is a comfort. Lisa says, I think of my blessings that I do have, and my puppy keeps me distracted. Sarah says, writing music and lyrics. Hopefully my experience can make someone else not feel alone. That's incredible, Sarah. Terry said, listening to comedy on TV, iTunes, etc. These are really great. Some of the other things that I'll chime in on that might be ideas are, one is practicing gratitude. That pairs very well with thinking about your blessings. Thinking about things that you're grateful for can be kind of comforting, and that feels good when you think about those things. Also, there's a lot of music here for comfort, and a lot of some distraction stuff, which is incredibly good. I think is healthy for us and important for us to access as well. And we have Linda walks her dog and looks at nature. It's awesome. And so you can kind of see that, it's important for us when we have things and uncertainties in our lives, and some of our uncertainties might be kind of long range, kind of far away, or it might be an uncertainty that's kind of close up, like I've got an MRI coming up. How do you manage that uncertainty? So, again, thinking about what we've covered so far, one is the investing in your self-care and taking care of yourself. Also accepting and acknowledging those feelings and not judging yourself for how you're feeling. And then also going to things that feel comfort, gives you comfort or calm. I also want to reiterate, talking with a friend might be helpful or provide some level of comfort or calm. Also, let's see, I said practicing gratitude. Sometimes it might be finding something that feels cozy. And that is a word that that can be a little bit confusing, but we all think of cozy as we have our unique things that make us feel cozy. So thinking about things that give you a little bit of comfort and feel cozy. For me, it might be a conversation with a friend or a cup of tea or something like that. But thinking about healthy things that you can go towards, because sometimes we can go towards unhealthy things if we're not intentional. And then Pamela says cooking. That is a really great coping mechanism as well. So we're going to move on to our next slide. So another strategy for dealing with uncertainty is to not believe everything that you think. Don't believe every thought. And we've talked about in the MS mental wellness chat before, cognitive reframing, also cognitive behavioral therapy approaches. But sometimes, a tactic for dealing with uncertainty or stress related to uncertainty is really to allow yourself to not believe everything that you're thinking. That might be easier said than done because our thoughts really create how we feel, right? So some strategies for this is that one, you could see a counselor and talk to them and learn a little bit about cognitive reframing or cognitive behavioral therapy to help kind of change our thoughts. But another strategy is one, you could think, what would I tell a friend in this situation? Because often we will tell ourselves one thing, but we would not tell our friends the same thing. We would give them a different courtesy. Or you could talk with a friend and tell them what you're thinking, and kind of a trusted friend, and kind of see if they can kind of help you to kind of reframe or reshape what you're thinking. Often when our thoughts get out of control, they are more deviated to like worst case scenario, not impossible, but not likely, instead of realistic. And so there's two types of thinking that I like to, well, it's three types technically. So the first one is we can have very emotional thinking over here. And I'm kind of an emotional thinker because I definitely think with how I feel a lot of times. Over here, we have very logical thinking, rational thinking. I always say my son is very logical, rational thinker. And on both sides of the spectrum, they're not better than one or the other. Because they both can, if you're only rational, logical, you don't have the emotion to go with it. And if you're only emotion, you don't have the rational to go with it. So what we like to do with our thinking is when you have a thought, just say, is this coming from my emotional mind or my rational mind? And see, but what you want to do is you want to match them a little bit, because when you put your emotional thought paired with a rational thought, it becomes a wise thought. And so thinking about, is this a thought from my emotional mind or from my rational mind? I think that's, or a logical mind. And then see if you can reframe it to a rational thought, a wise thought. And, but when we run with every thought that we're thinking, especially when we're in a state of stress or a high state of emotional frustration, or if we're not as resilient minded, then if we're believing everything we're thinking sometimes, or we're not challenging some of our thoughts, sometimes things could be blown out of proportion, etc., or might not be being fair, and you're creating more stress for yourself. Okay, we're going to move on to our next slide. So another aspect I think that's important when we think about uncertainty. And as you can see, my dog Bella is right there in the background. So she says hello. She doesn't do as well with these evening programs. Sometimes she gets antsy. But one of the things that we can do is that we can look at what is in our control. Because often we tend to ruminate. I've seen this as a therapist and as a person with MS and as just a person in general, is that we can ruminate on things that are totally outside of our control. And so when we look at what's in our control, we can go from there, and then we can identify the things that we can do. Now we have Lori on here that recommended there's a book called The Whole Brain Living that breaks down the 4 brain characters. That's so very helpful. And it's a book by Jill Bolt Taylor called Whole Brain Living. And Lori recommended that for the group. But when you think about what is in your control, right? I want to ask us as a group, thinking about like right now, when you think about your life, your situation, and I know our situations are all different from one another. We may have some similarities. We may have a lot of differences. I don't know. But what is something that's in your control right now in your life? Even with your MS, what is something that's in control? And I will get us started. So one of the things that I know that's in my control with my MS is my ability to manage my stress. I cannot control the stress I have. I can't control that I have MS. I can't control. It's in my control to comply with my treatments, but I can't control if my treatment's always going to work, etc. But I can control how I manage my stress. So we have here, how I react is in my control. If you can hang tight, I'm gonna let my dog out real quick. Hold on one second. I'm so sorry. I believe that Bella is no longer going to be allowed in my evening programs. She gets too antsy. Okay. How I react is in my control. How I can breathe is in my control. My attitude's in control. So Linda and Tanya both said their attitude. Sarah said breathing. Lori said how she reacts. So there's a lot of things that we have in our control. How it's in our control to take care of ourselves. It's also in our control to implement extra self-care. With MS, it's in our control to comply with treatment, treatments with recommendations from your doctor. It's in our control to think about the things that you're grateful for and the things that you can do. Anne-Marie said that. Thank you so much. So it's in our control instead of thinking about the things that we can't do or might not be able to do one day, et cetera. It's really thinking about what you're thankful for now and the things that you can do. And that's a really great thing to focus on. Linda said removing ourselves from the situation. That is definitely something that often is in our control, is that we can remove ourselves from something that is causing stress, or we can choose to remove ourselves for a little bit. Also, it is in our control, after we kind of accept how we're feeling, to allow ourselves maybe compartmentalize a little bit and give ourselves space. So, I'm worried about I'm kind of worried about my blood work that's coming up or my MRI that's coming up, but that's in January. So, and I still have the rest of December. So I'm going to acknowledge that it worries me a little bit, but I'm going to set it over here, because if I hold it and stare at it all day, I'm going to miss the next couple weeks that I might have fun things going on. Linda also said she also said creating new boundaries. That's within our control. Absolutely. And the Antoinette, you would think that you guys could see and play off of each other because you're very similar. Antoinette said setting boundaries is my control. That's awesome. I know you guys can't see the question box like I can, but that's kind of neat when it plays. You guys interact with each other in that way and don't even know what's happening. So we're going to move on to our next slide real quick. So now we're going to talk a little bit about finding the meaning in the now and practicing mindfulness. So this is another thing that we can do to help kind of recenter us if we are, you know, how if we're dealing with things in the uncertainty, if we realize that that there are things that are bothering us or stressing us, is one is just kind of refocusing. And that is something that I think is really important for us to do is kind of to refocus, to recenter, to come back to the now. Because often the uncertainty is the I don't know. And we can maybe mentally prepare to some degrees with some, for some unknowns. But all that we have really is right now. And so some strategies, and I really a lot of your contributions in tonight's program, I think, are beautiful. But bringing yourself into the now, maybe looking at things that you're grateful for right now. On days that I know if I have cognitive challenges, I don't focus on that. It will bother me. But what I do is I kind of refocus into kind of what's going on in my life in that moment. Because honestly, if I just stay very bothered, actually everything kind of continues to get worse for me anyways. And so practicing mindfulness. So there's some great grounding and breathing activities that can help. We've covered a lot of these on the MS Mental Wellness Chat before, but I'll bring up just one or two. There is a really great grounding exercise where you kind of just bring yourself kind of back to where you are, in the sense that you kind of, what is something that you can see? What is something that you can smell? What is something that you can hear, that you can taste, and that you can touch, and kind of bringing you back? Or you can ground yourself with things that you're grateful for, things that you're doing right now. And then breathing exercises also can help to be a good foundation. So for a breathing exercise, one of the ones that I would recommend is square breathing. And for square breathing, what we would do is that we inhale for a count of 4, then we hold it for a count of 4, we exhale for a count of 4, and then we hold for a count of 4. So I'll show you what that looks like. So you would inhale for 2, 3, 4, hold it for 2, 3, 4, exhale for 2, 3, 4, and then hold it for 2, 3, 4. So they call it square breathing or box breathing. And that can kind of help you, kind of center you a little bit. We need to have some of these tools to kind of help just kind of get back and recentered and kind of where we are. And when we can do that, that can help us, instead of focusing on something outside of our control or something that we don't have an answer to. So we're going to move on to our next slide. So what are some of the ways that you can pull yourself to focus on the now? How do you pull yourself in the present moment? So some of you may be really good at this. Some of you might struggle with this. But what is something that can kind of help bring you kind of back? If you're kind of worried about something, bring your mind back to what you're doing. And I will get us started. One of the things, music can kind of get me focused back to, kind of where I am, instead of thinking over here about these things. And definitely the grounding exercise for me is really helpful. But I do find that the breathing is something I deviate to the most. So if you're feeling stressed or you're thinking about things, what is something that you do to kind of bring yourself back? Also, looking outside. My goodness, looking outside can be very helpful for that. Good. We've got some suggestions here. We have Antoinette that said, disconnect from technology, go walk outdoors. Anne-Marie says, I love baking. I have a recipe I want to try out. That's such a great thing because that gets you focused. Carol says, making a list of things to do. James said, music. Lisa said, cry. And that's okay. That's actually, that's okay. Sometimes we have to get those emotions out. And I am a big believer that sometimes crying is what we need to do. Let's see if we have any more. So we don't have any more right now, but if we have more that come in, I'll absolutely read it. So we'll move on to our next slide. So another thing that we can do with uncertainty is prepare the best we can. And I think that to some degree it's good to have a plan, and so that way you can kind of just be as prepared as possible, and then you can kind of move on. Like, I think a great example would be, if you were somebody living that lives with urinary incontinence. You sometimes you can't really. The uncertainty of that actually can be very hard and frustrating. So what you might want to do is have extra change of clothes in your car, and some cleanup items. So that way, if you're going to an event and you just don't know if you'll ever experience, say, a urinary incontinence event, that at least you are prepared and you have a set of clothes if you need it. And so that's an important thing. I know a long time ago, my husband and I, we decided to buy a house with with a bedroom on the main level, and I've still been able to go up and down our stairs. But that was a way that we felt like we could practically feel like we were preparing, and I might not ever need it. I think actually, as I get older, regardless, I will need a bedroom on the main level. But beyond that, that was kind of one way that we felt like we were preparing. And then also for me, preparing with the unknowns of symptoms, just kind of thinking about naps and, those things to kind of take care of yourself. So we have some other good mindfulness, bringing you back activities I wanted to share that people wrote in. So Carol says she feeds the birds. Sorry, I just put birds and squirrels together. Birds and squirrels. And then Maddie says music, art, and breathing. And then Lori said she journals to help cope, and she researches a lot. So that's perfect. So when we think about preparing, it doesn't mean that we're preparing for the worst, so to say. But if you have something that you're kind of worried about, then just prepare the best you can, and then that you have that's what you've done, and that can help a little bit too and provide some relief. And we'll move on to our next slide. So now we're going to talk a little bit about surrounding ourselves with support. So of course, life has a lot of uncertainty, and sometimes with health, there's a lot of uncertainty, and in general, life has a lot of uncertainty. And I think surrounding ourselves with good support and positive people can be helpful. Sometimes we can't pick everybody, right? But we can choose. One of the things in our control is to actually have some people that do bring a better energy, or that are more supportive. And it might not be your typical people. It might not be your family members. It might be your friend. It might be someone that you met at a support group one time. It might be a lot of different things, but making sure that you're surrounding yourself with support, and that is incredibly helpful. I wanted to share, so for the preparing the best you can, because people chimed in. So Dion said she prepares the best she can, and then she's kind to herself. Thank you for saying that, Dion. I think we all need to hear that. Anne Marie said, I make sure my shower chair's in the bathtub, my cane is available, or my walker, just in case I need them. I also make sure that I have extra bags for my urostomy. Sorry. And then Maddie says, he loves that I said, bring you back to where you are. Thank you, Maddie. Lisa said, this wasn't impossible. So I can't wait for suggestions. So Lisa, if you can let me know, is this the surround yourself with support? Is that what's impossible? So just let me know. And then Anne Marie said, when I'm out of my room, my cats can sense if I'm stressed, so they provide me a lot of comfort. That is great, Anne Marie. So surrounding yourself with support. So we'll talk about that just a little bit more as I'm waiting to see if Lisa's gonna write back. But this one is easier said than done, right? Like, because there's we can have people in our life that are not supportive. We get to choose kind of who's in our support group or who's in our support circle, so to say. And I think sometimes the most atypical people are the people that end up kind of being in our support circle, and to me that's okay. Some people are very lucky that they might have family and they might have incredibly great spouses and extended church family and a big network. I'm not a big network person. So Lisa said yes, that her health team is not a sense of support, and she doesn't have many people in her life. So this is, I think, important. It's very easy to be isolated. Thinking about what are some ways, and by being on tonight's call, I know that you don't get to see each other and you can't go back and forth in conversation, but this is something. This is the beginning of some interaction. Is finding some connections with people. And I'm also going to recommend, Carol says that this one's difficult for her too. So I want you guys both to know that you're not alone, and I want to echo that. I think sometimes we have to be brave and try to. And you're on this call, and you're resilient for doing this, but trying to put yourself out there a little bit to expand that support a little bit. And sometimes we might need to start with like a counselor or a therapist or somewhere from the professional support first, and then kind of like look at your network, etc. But this is definitely something in counseling that's been very helpful. And then Dion just said, I interact with a virtual book club. Thank you so much for sharing that. And that is incredible. And that's important. So that's a really good example of kind of probably a support network that has grown. It's virtual, and but it has strengthened. But it started by people that are not in your home. So we're going to move on to our next slide, but I hope that if this is an area that you struggle with, that you can think of things outside of the box, something a little bit different. And I applaud you for being on tonight's call, because this is kind of a part of it is starting to interact. One thing I wanted to ask, and I ask this a lot, is does anyone have any tools or resources or strategies on how to ask for help? And we can even relate this to asking for support. If your support system is not that great, how can you expand that? So Anne Marie here said that she does Zoom with her counselor and church friends. That is great. Thank you for sharing that. When I was doing therapy prior to my patient education role that I'm in, I was a therapist and I was doing Zoom sessions all day long, and it worked really well. Julie said her MS group, the Force in Downey. Julie, can I ask you, is your MS group a virtual group? And if it's a virtual group, can anybody join it? I'm just asking because I think that's important. But I think that, and this might actually be Julie's group now that I'm thinking about it. But Julie, if you can write in and let us know. But so because that might be a good thing, is to try to go to a MS support group that's virtual, and that might expand some of your people that you're interacting with, and that might be very helpful. So I'm going to give Julie a second to respond. But if that is your MS group called The Force is Downey, let me know, and if it is virtual, because maybe we can lead some of the other people to your group. But there are some other virtual groups, and it might be some are MS related and some are not MS related. So as we're waiting on Julie to, Linda said there's many MS support groups on Facebook. That's another great suggestion. Thank you, Linda. This is why I love you guys, because I have a lot of resources, but you guys have a lot of resources too. And while I have all my information kind of ready, you're going to think of things that I don't have written down. Okay, so we're going to go on to our next slide, and we're going to talk about looking forward. So again, I mentioned earlier on in tonight's program that, I think it's important that we, December usually is a year that, or a month that in the end we feel, more nostalgic about. We tend to be a little bit more reflective by the time we get to January. And then the irony is that I'm talking about uncertainty, which is kind of like, well, we don't want to stay in the future, but I also think it's important to have things to look forward to, and it's also okay to look forward, right? We might not know all the answers. So Julie did get back with me. Julie said her program is online and in person. And also Linda said that she is the admin for the Happy MS group. And remember, guys, this is going to be recorded, so you'll be able to go back to it. And Antoinette says, MS Bucket shows the local MS events we can all attend. Perfect. Thank you, guys. So we're going to talk a little bit about looking forward. So I'm going to ask to go to the next slide, please. And before we're done, I will repeat all of these support groups again. So that way, if you want to have a pen and paper, or if you want to even just record me on your telephone or something as I say them, that you'll have the opportunity to do that. So this is something silly. I call it kind of silly that I do with my family usually on New Year's Eve, and I think it's an important thing to do, because while we've had challenges within our year, we often have lessons that we've learned, things that we've accomplished, things that we've loved. We have memories. And so I think that's important for you to do. But when we look forward, I also want to call attention to, thinking about what is something that you want to do next year. So I'm so thankful that the group has been great about giving information and resources on support groups and virtual book clubs, like, thinking about how you could expand. Or are there things that you want to get better at? Maddie, I promise you one day I'll get better at my ukulele, because I do try to play with it some, but I need to probably take lessons. And what are things that you're looking forward to, or that you want to look forward to? I know for me, I want to look forward to traveling a little bit more. I'm hoping that will be in my future this year. So it's okay that we don't know all the answers related to MS, to our illness, to our treatments, to our abilities. We don't know everything. What we know is what we have right now, right? But even if we don't have all the answers to everything, we still are very deserving of having things to look forward to, making plans, investing in ourselves, doing things that help us to feel good. And we absolutely deserve to have things to look forward to, either big or small. Sometimes the smallest things are the best things to look forward to. So I'm going to go back real quick to the support groups real quick, because I want to make sure I mention these again, because I think they're super important. So Julie's group her group is called The Force in Downey, DOWNEY. Linda says there's MS support groups on Facebook. Julie says her group is online and in person. And Linda is the admin for the Happy MS group. And then Antoinette shared MS Bucket shows the local MS events we can all attend. Perfect. So I think that was all. So, and I wanted to make sure that we give attention to those things. So we're going to move on to our next slide, but I do challenge you to think about your year in review and think about, even regardless of any uncertainty, what are things that you look forward to? What do you want to do? What are things that you want to learn? And keep those things as a focus. And that can probably help to direct, probably actually better emotional wellness and some recreation and purpose, etc. So again, I want to reiterate that you're not alone, and I hope that that you guys know this. You show up so beautifully well for each other on this mental wellness chat. But I want you to know that you're not alone. I also want to take a minute and just say something pretty seriously. If you're dealing with depression or anxiety that is feeling out of control, I encourage you to seek medical help or to go to your healthcare provider or go to an emergency room or contact a suicide assistance line. This is important to talk about because I think sometimes we can go on like we're very happy and we might not be. And happy is kind of one of those words I actually don't like to say too much, but we might look like we're happy, but inside maybe we're not. And that can be really painful. And often with MS, depression and anxiety can be comorbid. It's just naturally a part of the disease. And so I want to reiterate that you are not alone. And there are people, there are resources, there are people that care. And if you need help, there is help out there for you. I promise you. Okay, so this is, if you've been a part of this program, you know this slide so very well. This is a little bit of a map of North Carolina. I don't like to say goodbye because I like to say see you later because I hope to see you next month. We have a really great community here. You guys are incredible. Please reach out to your healthcare provider if you're struggling with any exacerbated feelings of depression, anxiety, anything. Please reach out for help. But in the meantime, we will be here every month. We'll come together. We'll bring resources, go over some tools or things to help. And until then, I wish you guys a peaceful holiday. And I really hope that you allow yourself to have cozy and comfort. And until next time, I'll see you later. Bye.